Are you ready for a time travel adventure that doesn't involve fancy gadgets or theatrical docudrama? Buckle up, because we're blasting back to ancient Greece, where your idea of a bad day doesn't even scratch the surface of reality. Welcome to Why You Wouldn't Last. A day in ancient Greece and more. A historical romp that would make even the toughest modern-day survivalist throw in the towel at the first whiff of olive oil mixed with unwashed toga. This isn't just a stroll through the Parthenon, my friends. This is a satire-stuffed examination of how the average Athenian, knee-deep in filth and fighting for their next meal, battled not just the Spartans, but also wildly unsanitary living conditions and the kind of gourmet cuisine that could only be described as, well, non-existent. Forget Netflix and chill. It was more like arsenic and anxiously waiting for the next war. Now, picture waking up to a world with limited soap. Yes, soap. Sprinkled with the constant threat of your next-door neighbor eager to advance their military career by launching you from a siege tower. We'll dish out tales of how the Greeks practically invented the term tough love when it came to survival. If getting smacked down with a shield at the agora didn't kill your spirit, then the diet of stale bread and moldy cheese surely would. But we're not just talking about these rugged Greeks. Oh no. Our journey also deviates to the divine heights of Boudica, the warrior queen who took on the Romans with a spirit that could probably knock a cyclops flat. Prepare for an uproarious, eye-opening journey through history that reveals how the everyday Greeks scrambled for dignity while setting the stage for legacies that would last through time. So, wash your hands, or don't. It really won't matter in a moment, and join us, because if you think life is tough now, wait till you see what those sandals were really hiding. And remember, if ancient Greeks had Instagram, we'd all be experts in the art of the humble brag, along with a few battle wounds and possibly a case of lead poisoning from dinnerware. Get ready, history buffs, for you're about to witness a world where comfort food was an oxymoron, and survival meant snapping selfies with your battle scars. Lights up on a sun-drenched Athenian market circa 400 BC. The colors are vivid, the sounds are a cacophony of bartering, and the smells, oh, the smells. Jasmine, goat cheese, and that unmistakable aroma of approximately 700 people attempting to bathe within a 12-hour window. As a backdrop, we have Socrates, whose face is a perfect blend of wisdom and utter confusion as he contemplates the existential implications of figs. Or was it olives? Could it be that he's contemplating life while picking his lunch? Who knows? All we know is the philosopher's haircut screams, "I don't even own a comb," or a good idea. But what's significant, you ask? The figs. Sweet, succulent, and potentially deadly, these fruits were at the center of what the Athenians lovingly referred to as the Civic Fig Festival. Yes, folks, nothing says civic duty like the chance to win a prize for the largest fig, or better yet, the least fatal one. However, one man's fig is another man's poison. Quite literally, the atmosphere is charged with anticipation and a little bit of anxiety, as nearby gladiators nervously flex their muscles, not for the crowd, but for their upcoming fig-eating contest. You see, there's a myth that goes around every year. Eat the most figs, and not only do you win the title of Fig King, but you also get immunity from all public ridicule. An enticing offer in a society where being laughed at was the equivalent of a death sentence. As the competition begins, the audience erupts in cheers, which translate roughly to eat them or die trying. Amidst grunts, groans, and the occasional roar from a customer who just realized he has mistakenly tried to barter with a pig instead of a merchant, tension builds. Oh, but the superstitions. Every Athenian knew the figs from Mount Hymettus were the best, and yet all were terrified of the one fig seller rumored to have an actual pet snake, which he claimed to be a guardian spirit of the figs, or perhaps a way to scare off competitors. Who knows? It's hard to decipher snaky motivation when you've got a market full of people arguing over who looked better in togas while holding a fig. Tensions rise as our fig-aiding gladiators passionately consume fig after fig, each bite slathered in honey that, according to the hottest gossip, made some folks feel like they were flying. You could almost hear the collective heartbeats of the crowd, although half of them were probably just concerned about a fig-induced sugar high. Then it happened. One brave gladiator, a towering figure named Darius, suddenly stopped mid-chew, his eyes bulging as he sputtered and coughed with the intensity of an unseen drama unfolding before a rapt audience. Everyone gasped and held their breath. Was he choking on a fig pit, or had some evil adversary unleashed the true poison of the figs? Chaos broke loose. Wives fainted, children screamed, and cats frequently overfed by excess figs dashed in every direction. Darius finally managed to cough out the remnants of his fig, demonstrating that, indeed, he was fine. He merely choked on the unpredictability of life, a fig-shaped metaphor for existence, if you will. The crowd erupted once again, this time in applause, despite the fact that some had just realized their morning figs were still inside their bags, rapidly spoiling. The fig contest ended with Darius crowned the champion not just of fig-eating, but apparently also of near-death experiences, as he managed to regain his composure by simply declaring, "I only came here for the figs." And, just like that, the mystery of the peanut allergy in ancient Greeks was overshadowed. Let's remember, ancient Greeks might have had woozy ideas on democracy and philosophy, but they were always dead serious when it came to food. And if surviving the fig contest taught them anything, it's that no matter how sweet life gets, the pit will always be there to remind you. So what's the lesson here? Always read the fine print when engaging in competitive fig consumption, and never trust someone with too many fruit-related superstitions. Cue the melancholic lyre music. The year 429 BC. The stage, a rustic Athenian marketplace alive with the vibrant smells of stale olives, dubious cheeses, and an inexplicably popular dish of boiled cabbage. Because who doesn't want to experience the thrill of the flatulence that could bring down an empire? In this culinary wonderland of questionable hygiene and philosophically misunderstood cuisine, we meet our protagonist, Socrates, the original master of self-inflicted philosophical debates, already setting deep thoughts on, quite fittingly, how long a leftover olive could possibly last before it not only goes bad, but also develops a weird attitude. As Socrates strolls through the market, the sunlight dances through the dust, illuminating the many vendors hawking their questionable wares. The first vendor, a robust gentleman with an impressive beard that practically begs to be painted, shouts about his olives. Freshly harvested. Well, sort of. Last week. He presents a vibrant jar, yet the olives inside have taken on a hue rivaling that of Athena's dreaded yogurt spill. Telltale signs of culinary neglect, which, ironically, marks them as mature in a culture where wisdom reigns supreme. sound? A symphony of bartering voices interspersed with the occasional slap of a fly that's more than likely a carryover from the last marketplace brawl over an exceptionally pungent cheese. Yes, that distinct odor of feta, strong enough to make a Spartan weep from the nostrils, wafts through the air, making Socrates ponder mortality through the simple act of cheese appreciation. But here's where it gets truly ridiculous. Ancient Greeks revered food as a divine experience. If a meal wasn't blessed by at least 3 deities and accompanied by an elaborate prayer, it was considered sacrilegious. Imagine, if you will, Socrates attempting to bless an especially moldy loaf of bread before he bites into it, only to have his friend Plato remind him that last week's bread was as inspirational as it was incomprehensible, much like Socrates' own philosophy. Tension mounts as the locals become inexplicably convinced that the olives are cursed, rumored to be the snack of choice for disgruntled oracles who were incorrectly interpreted. What starts merely as food anxiety spirals into mass hysteria. Vendors shout accusations. It's the olives. They're plotting against us. Confusion reigns as people pull philosophers into food ritual debates. In a moment of inspired absurdity, one Athenian points and proclaims that the olives are communists, while another scoffs, declaring them as anarchistic symbols of dissent. Finally, amid this dizzying chaos, Socrates decides to take a bold bite of the most suspicious olive. A hush falls over the crowd as he chews thoughtfully, savoring the mixture of salt and existential dread. The crowd leans in, breaths held, until he declares, "They taste like nothing." A profound disappointment, akin to, I don't know, unrequited love. The marketplace bursts into laughter, entirely missing the point of his philosophical ponderings, yet solemnly resolved to leave the olives alone forever. Historically, the Greeks loved their olives, which were more than just food. They symbolized peace and prosperity. Yet, even these innocent little guys could incite a culinary crisis steeped in aversion. Perhaps the key takeaway is that in ancient Greece, not even your food was safe from the existential crises of the day. And thus, the moral of the story: always trust your instincts. If the olive looks like it has suffered more betrayals than a tragic hero, perhaps it's time to leave the grocery store with no more than a few grapes and a notion that air freshener wasn't available since 1000 BC. In the grand tradition of things that might give you food poisoning, we find ourselves in ancient Athens circa 450 BCE, where the sun is setting over a bustling agora. Behold the aroma of baked bread wafting through the air, mingling with the distinct smell of olive oil. An oil so revered it is said the gods themselves might bathe in it for fancier galas. And here comes our hero, or perhaps our unwitting victim, Thrasybulus, a naive farmer who believes participating in a symposium, an excuse for men to drink wine and philosophize, will elevate him to the ranks of esteemed Athenian elites. Little does he know his quest for wisdom is about to turn into a slippery game of espionage. The scene is set beneath a canopy of bright, garish colors. Think drapes so lavish they must have been woven by 100 enthusiastic spiders. Laughter mingles with a cacophony of clinking amphorae, and the atmospheric strumming of lyres fills the air, punctuating the fervor of drunken debate. But the true star of this soiree is the olive oil, neatly arranged in a golden pitcher made from more gold than any peasant should have ever dreamed of seeing. Now, if you think olive oil is just a fancy condiment, think again. In ancient Greece, olive oil was more than a cooking staple. It was currency, it was beauty regimen, and, strangely enough, it was also a political instrument. As Thrasybulus digs into the menu, featuring offerings such as honeyed figs and salted fish, he discovers the hidden truth. One drop of this oil could decide the fate of an empire. You see, the Athenians had concocted a strange ritual known as the Alaios Rakela. Legend has it that the oil harvested during a solar eclipse was imbued with magical properties that could ensure victory in elections, or ensure opposition candidates took one sniff and promptly resigned in a fit of coughing. Thrasybulus, blissfully unaware of any of this, eats his fig and raises his glass. Most attendees here are hitched into a fantastical plot woven together by rival political factions, whispering sedition and treachery, while attempting to pour olive oil on one another's heads. The priority amidst the embers of conspiracy? To ensure the right candidate sips the lucky oil before what is sure to be a contentious election. Such small things, like flavored oil meant for conditioning one's hair, take on great importance as political factions plot away with their flood of jokes and even more absurd barbs at each other. But just as Thrasybulus leans in for what he believes to be a wise proclamation, a man in a toga lunges across the table, knocking the prized olive oil pitcher to the floor. As the liquid spews out in slow motion, attendees gasp like they've just witnessed the last drop of nectar fall from ambrosia. Thinking quickly, Thrasybulus improvises, scrambling up the remnants of olive oil while trying to shout out a clever line about how not even the gods could afford to waste such valuable liquid. What he doesn't realize is that he's just stepped into the middle of a century-old conspiracy. The oil wasn't even for cooking. It was a souped-up potion meant to curse rival candidates to eternal bad luck, or worse, professional failures in philosophy. As the symposium dissolves into chaos, with men frantically trying to bottle the spilled oil in amphorae because who wouldn't want to smell like they just bathed their cat, Thrasybulus boldly announces the very first pickled olive toast, inadvertently solidifying a new tradition that has no social or political implications whatsoever. Meanwhile, the actual conspirators are too busy debating if this calamity could possibly become a comedy act. The moral? In ancient Greece, even the most prestigious oil could slip through your fingers faster than a honor-inviting speech, all while you think you're merely enjoying olive oil on your bread. So remember, when life gives you olives, keep your amphora close and your enemies closer, especially when the oil is magical. Roll the footage. The sun shines mercilessly upon the Agora of Athens in 428 BC, a bustling marketplace where the aroma of olives competes with the unmistakable scent of desperation. Imagine it. Merchants hawking their goods, while the local philosopher contemplates existence, probably while wondering why anyone drinks anything besides olive oil. Enter our star of the show, Eucalys, a promising young athlete chosen to partake in the very first olive oil Olympics, a neighborhood event that was surprisingly just an excuse to slather oneself in liquid gold and slide through the mud like a soap bar with ambitions. The crowd murmurs with anticipation. Waves of heat shimmering in the distance as Eucalys prepares for the spectacle ahead, with nothing but a fanny pack of olive oil at his side. You can almost hear the sounds of cheers and jeers mingling in a cloud of recycled gossip. Did you hear Cleon's mother can douse her goat in so much olive oil it slips into the next village? Meanwhile, the smell of clay amphorae clinks together with the laughter of children running about. Ah, the spirit of competition, or at least a competition to see who could remain the most slippery while trying to run errands. Now, ordinarily, one might think athletes would prepare by training, resting, or buying the latest in fashionable togas. Not in Athens. No. The pre-game ritual involved more oil than you could shake a stick at. Eucalys and his fellow competitors would rub themselves down until they looked less like budding champions and more like greasy vegetables prepared for a grand roast. Before the events even began, there was an extensive process known as the oily scouring, wherein competitors would argue about the best source of olive oil as if it were the elixir of life itself. Well, to be fair, in Athens they might have been onto something. Entrants would gather around a sacred olive tree, chanting verses as if trying to seduce Athena herself into blessing their performance. Superstition loomed heavy. No one wanted to be that guy who forgot to appease the olive gods. Eucalys, with his uncontainable dreams of victory, cried out, "O great deity of oil, give me speed to slip past my opponents and a non-stick surface to avoid falling flat on my face." Once a jury of judges deemed the olive rubbing appropriate, final preparations unfolded. The starting line, a sandy pit that had likely hosted more philosophical debates than actual races, awaited the brave. Little did they know, the olive oil Olympics would soon take a turn. As the event began, Eucalys whipped into action, only to realize that everyone else had adhered to the flop and glide technique, creating what can only be classified as a literal lubrication catastrophe. Athletes soared past him, slicker than a dolphin in a synchronized swim competition. But as he took off, Eucalys twirled, slipped, and, as gracefully as a corncob, landed right into a fountain of olive oil. Gasps erupted from onlookers. Charioteers paused their debates, and the local goat keepers stopped inspecting their flocks. And just like that, Eucalys transformed from aspiring champion to the unofficial poster child for the perils of overly enthusiastic body oiling. In a dramatic twist of fate, he emerged from the fountain fully covered, glimmering like the proverbial toast no one asked for. As spectators roared with laughter, he did what any self-respecting athlete would do in those desperate moments. He posed for the crowd, creating the most unforgettable moment in Athenian history, resulting in a Phidias-like statue that stood in the Agora for centuries, reminding future generations that sometimes it does pay to slip away from the pack, literally. Lessons learned? If you're ever inclined to participate in an athletic event, remember, oiling up may not be your best bet, especially when the only thing standing between you and glory is a slippery path to humility. Picture this: ancient Greece, a sun-drenched utopia where philosophical debates are only slightly less common than unsolicited oracle prophecies. The year? Approximately 432 BCE. The location? A bustling Athenian agora, where citizens proudly demonstrate their ability to discuss Socrates while simultaneously nibbling on what can only be described as glorified hummus. The atmosphere is positively electric, charged with the pulsating aroma of olive oil, sun-ripened tomatoes, and perhaps an inexplicably strong hint of sheep dung, thanks to the nearby market. The sounds? A delightful cacophony of merchants hawking wares, children shrieking, and the distant murmur of a rabid philosopher arguing about whether olives are, in fact, fruit, or merely a divine prank by the gods. Our key protagonists are a young Athenian named Lysander, whose life revolves around impressing his fellow citizens with culinary delights and an ever-increasing ego, and his best friend Thucydides, who has come to appreciate the ghostly qualities of his own meals, mostly because they've been buried under a mountain of garlic. The main dish at the center of this gastronomic fiasco? A pot of not-so-fresh dolmades that have seen better days. As they gather excitedly around the dinner table, Lysander boasts about a new secret ingredient he found at the market that promises to curry favor with the deities, a delicately aged fermented fish sauce. Unknown to him, ancient Greeks were somewhat picky about their fish and would rather risk the wrath of Poseidon than consume the ill-fated delicacies from the depths of the sea. But the real tension spikes as guests begin to arrive, including the local oracle, who has to share that instead of a divine blessing, she's more of a fan of bad news and even worse appetizers. The dolmades, once vibrant and sticky with deliciousness, have taken on a spiritually questionable aura, possessing the kind of stench that could baffle even the most skilled of philosophers. And just as Lysander thinks he's managed to avoid divine repercussions, there's a thunderous roll of real thunder. The gods are definitely not pleased. Then enter the idea of a Hellenic food festival, an evening where the gods themselves would choose their favorites. A twist here. What if Lysander could offer the dolmades as his entry? Spoiler alert, the oracle's eyes widen in horror as she swiftly signs an omen that may as well read, "You've met your doom, Lysander." But throughout the panic, Lysander insists that this is a chance of destiny. The dolmades are promptly served to the gods as a twisted act of culinary desperation, and as waves of odorous skepticism fill the divine banquet, the skies turn dark. Just as one of the elder gods reaches for a dolmade, a ravenous dolphin jumps out of the sea, performing acrobatics that would make an Olympic gymnast weep, and swallows the entire tray in one bite. Well, who could blame it? Even the underlings of the deep knew a disaster when they saw one. At this point, the gods decide they've had enough, and a bolt of lightning strikes down not on the dolmades but on poor Thucydides' surprisingly gourmet sundress. Talk about divine intervention. No one expected a bit of instant karma, especially photosensitive fabric having a very bad day. Eventually, Lysander's culinary dreams dissolve like the flavor of a tooled dole-maid. The moral of the story? Even in ancient Greece, no meal is without its perils, and sometimes the gods simply don't have a taste for the local fare. So, when it comes to ancient cuisine, if it smells funny, just skip the appetizer, especially when the gods might be on the guest list. Picture this. The sun is setting over Athens, painting the sky like a drunken artist at a wine festival. The year is approximately 400 BC, and the city is buzzing with preparation for the annual Dionysia, a celebration dedicated to Dionysus, god of wine, festivity, and regrettable decisions. The vibrant air is thick with the smell of overripe grapes, fresh goat cheese, and the palpable tension of so many citizens trying to impress a god who enjoys both theater and the occasional drunken brawl. In a cramped courtyard, a group of philosophers, none of whom have ever convinced anyone that their own life choices were sound, are gathered for a serious discourse on a truly pressing question. Should one ever trust the wine pressed from the maiden lady's vintage grapes? Cue Socrates, probably sporting a sense of humor that is not reflected in his beard. Let's discuss the implications of this viticultural strain, he drawls, leaning on a pillar that looks like it might collapse at any moment. If one must endure the effects of the excess consumption, which, statistically, has yet to kill any philosophers, how do we ensure that such indulgence does not muddy our ideal of the noble life? The laughter peels across the courtyard like the very grapes they're about to squash underfoot. The food at this gathering? A remarkable spread. Bowls overflowing with figs, olives that somehow look far too luxurious to be mere snacks, and of course amphorae of wine that seem far too precariously stacked for the safety-conscious. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts. Over on the edge of the courtyard, a priestess of Dionysus swings into view, her lithe frame adorned with flowing garments that look more like they came off a clearance sale at the local toga shop, full of divine purpose or completely out of her mind. Who could say? She licks her finger and holds it aloft, proclaiming that the winds of fortune have favorably released their grip upon her grape harvesting plans. She announces that any upcoming festival festivities will depend solely on whether the grapes are to be judged by taste or by divine whim. Now, tension rises. The crowd visibly flinches as she pours half the amphorae onto a waiting table, which, spoiler alert, was entirely not meant for serving alcohol or for judging the finest grapes of the festival. Most of these people would have squabbled over a half-emptied bottle back home while trying to keep their hem of their tunics clean. Glances exchanged between witty Athenian men and women question if etiquette even applies anymore as they prepare for philosophical debauchery. Wine-drenched theories descend into absurdity as Aristotle, clearly still wearing yesterday's grape-scented toga, disputes with Heraclitus over the ethics of getting tipsy after watching an over-the-top theatrical performance about philandering gods and vengeful nymphs, while Plato just tries to figure out whether there is absolute platonic love between the bottle and the table. The evening culminates in the great ceremony of grape stomping, both a test of courage and perhaps a form of aversion therapy for anyone who dared to admit they still punch a clock for an Athenian architect. The host, a rather proud-looking merchant, hops into a barrel filled to the brim with squashed fruit, wine splattering into the air like fireworks. It seems almost artistic, which is the last thing you want to tell him. But lo and behold, instead of divine odes or an effusion of artistic greatness. The priestess declares the winner based not on the best grape juice produced, but on who can manage to keep their tunic most stain-free while they dance, frolic, and dash in jubilant abandon across the courtyard. Grapes? Yes. Graciousness? Absolutely not. In a chaotic flurry of laughter and flailing limbs, not one philosopher remains unscathed or unstained. Their evening descends into comically exaggerated first-century antics, existential reassessments turning to shrieks of joy as drunken philosophy takes shape. The moral of this jovial festival: always expect the unexpected when engaging in Dionysian mysteries, for one may be inclined to weigh the merits of ideal lives against the possibility of getting their feet, or worse, their ideals, stuck in a barrel of festering grapes. So heed this lesson. When it comes to grape stomping, it might be best to just take a step back and remember that it's not all about pressing for great philosophy. Sometimes it's just about getting your toes dirty while you're at it. Picture this: Crete, circa 1600 BCE, where the sun blazes hotter than a poorly adjusted furnace and the aroma of freshly baked bread mingles with an assortment of unidentifiable spices that could either be dinner or a failed alchemical experiment. Our scene is set in the grand palace of Festos, home to a king ostentatious enough to make a peacock look gray and drab. As the palace doors swing open, the atmosphere floods in with an unsettling blend of excitement and anxiety. The sizzle of grilled meats can be heard above the excited chatter of the attendees, many of whom could have easily auditioned for roles in an ancient Greek soap opera given their dramatic gestures and embellished tales. And what's on today's menu? A monstrous feast as extravagant as a Hollywood film premiere, except instead of red carpets, we have ridiculously large platters of food that would make a modern buffet look like a snack table at a dentist's convention. Not to be outdone by mere mortals, our festive king, let's call him Fido I, has summoned only the finest chefs and, more importantly, a highly experienced food taster, because nothing screams elite banquet quite like the fear of poison lingering in the air. As the food makes its grand entrance, one can't help but notice the spread. There are mountains of olives glistening like tiny emeralds, amphorae overflowing with wine that could make a Roman centurion weep with jealousy, and fresh fish that might as well have swum in straight from the Mediterranean while yelling, "Don't eat me!" But the pièce de résistance is what looks like a towering mound of meat, heavy with suet and flaunting more grease than an ancient wrestling match. Of course, our loyal food taster, a brave soul that deserves a medal for bravery, takes his duty seriously, knowing that today he's not just sampling cuisine, he's speedrunning a game of culinary Russian roulette. He delicately picks up a shish kebab, adorned with mystery herbs that likely grew in a field, known more for its herbal folklore than its actual taste. As he takes a bite, the room holds its collective breath. Not just for his survival, but because no one is necessarily certain if those herbs might summon spirits or impart the wisdom of the ages, or both, but let's hope it's not the former. The atmosphere is thick with tension, as anxious glances dart between the wine goblets and suspicious meat. Someone coughs. A musician plucks his lyre nervously, and even the olives seem to roll away to spare themselves from the impending doom. The food taster chews with exaggerated seriousness, slowly evaluating the meat as if conducting a psychological experiment rather than just biting into dinner. Suddenly, he pauses, stares into space, and then, yes, it seems he's having a spiritual moment. Perhaps he's channeling the ancient gods, or perhaps just suffering from a mild case of indigestion. Miraculously, he swallows audaciously and proclaims, "Now that's a feast worthy of legends." Not quite the dramatic flair people expected. The room erupts in applause. They cheer, clapping like they've just witnessed an Olympic gold medalist. Then Fido I, encouraged by apparent divine intervention, proceeds to load up his plate unguarded, blissfully ignorant of the many who might pay dearly for this impulsive display of gluttony. Meanwhile, the taster quietly contemplates whether his part-time job as a professional human shield was worth the trouble. In the end, the feast ravages that night, but with the twist of fate, our daring food taster survives, deciding instead that his future might lie in a much safer profession. Like perhaps exactly anything else in the world. And, if that isn't a rumbling lesson for our viewer at home, consider this. When, in ancient Greece, always eat with honor and gratitude. Or, more importantly, possibly behind a heavy wall of history. Because, remember, in that world, one bite could either elevate you or send you to an early appointment with the underworld. Lesson learned: if your dinner comes with both a wine pairing and a side of anxiety, maybe skip the meat. Picture this. It's 431 BC, in a sun-drenched agora bustling with citizens dressed in flowing chitons and a suspiciously high number of olive oil merchants. The scene? An extravagant feast underway in honor of Athena, goddess of wisdom, and how to wisely rejectily or political enemies. Just as the sun sets behind the Parthenon, the air fills with the smell of roasted lamb mingled with the unmistakable scent of ancient sweat and societal tensions. Now enter our star of the evening, a distinguished-looking philosopher named Socrates, sporting an impressive beard that looks like it's hiding secrets, or snacks. He strides into the room with all the pomp of a man who has just discovered the joy of existential dread. His fellow diners? A gaggle of half-interested young men eager to debate profound concepts over the more important question of the evening: how much wine is too much wine? As the evening progresses, the table is set with a smorgasbord of delights designed to offend even the most forgiving modern palate. Spiced fish heads, figs stuffed with mystery cheese, and unidentifiable stews bubbling ominously. Someone coughs, and the fisherman's catch is decimated in a single moment of flailing forks, as half of the guests dive to grab the oracle of seafood as if it's the last lifeboat on the Titanic. Amidst the clattering of dishes and incessant chatter about the utopia that can never be, the tension builds like a toga-clad soap opera. You see, in ancient Greece, a feast wasn't just a meal. It was a carefully orchestrated display of power and wit, where food became a weapon of political sabotage. Candied honey cakes? That's an open invitation to a coup. Fish sauce? Projecting your absolute domination in culinary artistry, or risking ceremonial exile if it's too sour. And don't even get us started on their wine. It wasn't just drank, it was a challenge. The locals diluted their nectar with water, while others got hardcore, mixing in various spices, herbs, and probably a splash of whatever guilt they felt over the latest political scandal. The climactic ritual, the ultimate mixologist would stand, offering the wine while reciting a tongue twister that basically means, "May your hangover be merciful, and your disputes over olives be resolved by dawn." Just as philosophers begin to philosophize about the nature of drunkenness, the twist arrives like an unexpected guest. a messenger bursts through the door, looking breathless and distressed. He announces the war between Athens and Sparta is both ongoing and inconveniently close. Naturally, this brings about heated discussions about who would win based solely on who makes the better olives. Spoiler alert, no one is making military strategies here. Right when the disemboweling of olive jars escalates into full-blown chaos, Socrates raises his goblet of wine. Oh so, suddenly serious, yet clearly tipsy. "Gentlemen," he slurs eloquently, "it is not the olives we debate, but our very souls." The laughter erupts. Everyone's attention shifts as plates are cleared, conversation flares up, and the actual purpose of the feast, to honor a deity, is utterly forgotten in favor of arguments over the perfect meze. Who knew a meal could be so profoundly philosophical and yet completely irrelevant to the actual subject matter? As the sun rises over the agora, the true takeaway is a lesson in how to perform abstract reasoning under the influence of too much wine and bad fish stew. So, what's the supposed sage moral of this ancient gastronomic catastrophe? Remember, never let a good feast drown out truly critical discussions about the nature of your crumbling democracy. Unless there's wine involved, then all bets are off. Imagine, if you will, the sun is setting over Athens. Not a beautiful sunset, mind you, but one that signals the impending doom of a society where politics and dinner logistics are intertwined in the most explosive way possible. Enter the year 400 BCE, where the air is less serene sunset and more scent of poor choices and burnt offerings. Our scene unfolds in a bustling agora, teeming with life, but not quite the Instagram paradise you might picture. There are merchants hawking everything from olives to dubious furry creatures not due for dinner but somehow still on the menu. The lighting, dim, like your chances of surviving this culinary adventure. The sounds, a cacophony of haggling, the occasional clinking of wine goblets, and Athenian orators shouting their latest philosophy, which is only slightly less boring than listening to paint dry. Here, the key players. Socrates, the original contrarian, whose idea of a fun night is debating the ethical implications of eating snails. And his host, Chiron the centaur, a creature apparently half horse, half very awkward dinner guest. And let's not forget the star of our theatrical debacle, a heaping platter of boiled vegetables that looked so tragic it could win awards for Best Supporting Actor in a horror film. As the warriors, and by that, I mean philosophers, settle in with their wine cups, which are almost definitely filled with more than just wine, let's call it vintage. The stage is set for gastronomic pandemonium. Each bite is not merely food, it's a state of existential crisis waiting to unfold. Unbeknownst to our diners, an ancient superstition looms large over the meal. You see, the Greeks believed that every dinner was a performance to placate the gods. The only problem? Their expectations were out of this world. Literally. At the first sign of poor presentation, Chiron, with all the grace of a drunken horse, runs around reminding everyone that the gods need seasoning. Tensions simmer as Socrates argues that if you optimize your herb-to-vegetable ratio, the food should, in fact, inspire the soul. Chiron, meanwhile, frantically sprinkles salt like a confetti cannon gone rogue, declaring, "I can't see the divine in these peas." The poor peas, innocently boiled to death now being the subject of metaphysical debates, are thrust into the spotlight of a culinary circus. Just as Socrates prepares to deliver a soliloquy on the virtue of aubergine, disaster strikes. The gods seem to have taken a liking to their theater. A sudden crash, and the platter of sad vegetables slips from the table, tumbling towards Chiron's hooves, where it dramatically splatters against the cobblestone floor more theatrically than any Greek tragedy on record. While diners gasp in horror and shock, utterly bewildered by the potential culinary extinction event, Chiron lifts a hoof, dramatically declaring, "Is this the end of our meal?" Meanwhile, a nearby goat, thinking he's part of the production, charges towards the fallen veggies in what would become a legendary diplomatic incident between humans and livestock. As the commotion unfolds, none other than Athena appears. Swirling in, as it turns out, she was just enjoying the drunken debacles of mankind from the clouds overhead. One discerning glance at the smeared plate transforms the mood. "Oh, I was going to bless you for that offering, but this, I'd rather take my chances with the Trojan horse again." In the aftermath, everyone paused, realizing they dug their own culinary grave. The Athenians took the closest victory. They learned that never has a dinner gone worse, and that perhaps boiled vegetables shouldn't have been the main course in a banquet that doubled as a summons to the gods. So what's the faux moral of the story? When dining with ancient Greeks, remember, vegetables are to be served only after a thorough investigation of their compliance with divine taste. Picture this: 500 BCE, a sun-soaked afternoon in ancient Greece, with the aroma of olive oil and roasted lamb wafting through the air like an invitation to an epic feast. Yet, instead of banqueting lords and laughing philosophers, welcome to a gathering of Pythagoreans, a group more obsessed with numbers than nourishment, whose idea of a good time was calculating the hypotenuse over finding the perfect pita. The scene is set in an olive grove, the golden light filtering through the branches, illuminating a bizarre assortment of raw vegetables laid out with the precision of a geometric theorem. Yes, folks, today's menu does not include a single semblance of a luxurious meal, but rather an assembly of kale, radishes, and a strange aura of strict vegetarianism. The Pythagoreans, convinced that beans possessed a soul talk about overthinking your lentils, avoided them entirely. And as for discussing those prohibited legumes, well, that was practically a capital offense. The ambiance is oddly serene, yet tinged with a nervous tension, as if everyone has rigidly agreed that the fate of their souls is intricately tied to a strict adherence to celibacy, vegetarianism, and number theory. Voices are hushed. One incorrectly pronounced mathematical term could trigger a philosophical brawl. Flutes play in the background, but you can still hear the sound of brains overheating as they calculate the angles of their vegetarian salads, which, let's be honest, look more like torture devices than lunch options. But wait, enter the high priest of numbers, clad in flowing robes with a much too serious expression. He proclaims, "Today we feast." The crowd holds its collective breath. The feast, a massive flatbread topped with the finest chopped veggies, showcasing the Pythagorean theorem in edible form. They call it pizza divine, but to the untrained eye, it looks suspiciously like a glorified salad on a crust, tragically devoid of cheese, unless a thin veil of yogurt is miraculously deemed acceptable. No mozzarella here, apparently that tempts fate. So one can only imagine the discussions of divine geometry that rise higher than the olive trees themselves. The tension escalates to a hilarious climax as they prepare to slice the pizza divine into perfect triangles, as if the fate of the universe hung on the precision of their cuts. No one falters. No one dares to make a mistake. And the first slice reveals a perfectly triangular void of toppings. Gasps ensue. Women faint. Kids cry. It's as if they've just defied gravity itself. But here's the twist. When the pizzas are finally divided, it turns out that the pie has not only divided equally by area, but also by, wait for it, the number of their most questionable philosophical debates of the day. Suddenly, the proportions of toppings become not just a culinary discussion, but an existential crisis. Is this the true embodiment of happiness, or merely the fabric of our delusions? Someone questions, causing waves of panic as the entire group ponders their life choices over half-eaten, non-cheesy crusts. This moment of enlightenment is suddenly grave, as soon it becomes blindingly clear that the only thing worse than eating an ungodly vegetable flatbread is contemplating life itself at a Pythagorean feast. History tells us that their great fear of beans wasn't just about diet. It was an outright, superstitious panic that they might reincarnate as legumes if they consumed each other's cherished chickpeas. So, as the sun sets on our quirky gathering of mathematical gluttony, what's the takeaway? Clearly, it's that the only thing more twisted than a Pythagorean theorem is the notion of a pizza without cheese. And so we leave you with this gem. In ancient Greece, even a pizza party is a masterclass in anxiety and restraint, and remember, life's too short to not question your fellow philosopher and question your dinner plans. Welcome to the dazzling chaos of ancient Greece. The year 450 BC. A feast fit for Plato himself, yet exciting enough to have Socrates glancing over his shoulder with existential dread. The place? An open-air banquet, where the aroma of grilled meats competes with the rancid stench of unkempt philosophy lovers, all gathered around a table laden with sophisticated dishes designed to impress but likely to induce nausea. Imagine the lighting. Free-spirited sunlight dappled through olive trees, mixed with fetid wetness from recently spilled wine that had been left out for too long. But you, yes, you, are not just any guest. You are a modern outsider in a toga, struggling with the absolutely necessary yet shameful task of pretending you can hold your wine, desperately trying to decipher the difference between a dip and a punishment for bad behavior. As the evening drags on, the key players emerge. First up, a charismatic philosopher, Diogenes, the man who famously lived in a barrel and thought personal hygiene was overrated, now raving about the ethics of eating olives without a painfully tedious justification. Then there's Demetra, the hostess, shoving platters of unevenly cut goat and suspiciously green herbs at guests like a mythical Greek party planner with a death wish. The food, purportedly fresh, is whispering secrets from the margins of a food safety handbook that definitely didn't exist yet. Tension brews as the evening progresses. Bickering philosophers passionately argue over the correct soul-to-octopus ratio required for enlightenment, while others set about performing an elaborate ritual to appease the gods of gastronomy, because what else do you do while waiting for the lentil stew to be served? First, they grab a clay pot and pour in breadcrumbs that they bless with olive oil. All while reciting a mantra that loosely translates to, "Please don't let my mother taste this." Just as the tension reaches a fervent peak, a cacophony of arguments so loud you'd think it was a family reunion, rivalries ignite. One unlucky guest, convinced that someone has cursed the dip, erupts, shouting that he knows a guy who's definitely responsible for spiking the hummus with, wait for it, garlic. The horror. Panic ensues as someone nearly tumbles off a bench while another invokes the goddess of snacks, much to the confusion of everyone who thought they'd just come for food and debate. And then, as if on cue, a young lad enters, arms aghast, carrying a plate of the evening's grand surprise. Flaming cheese. Yes, flaming. Because nothing says, "let's eat," quite like a fire hazard. The room goes silent. Philosophers drop their grapes as they gaze upon the spectacle, turning it into an impromptu vote on whether it's divinely inspired or a clear signal of the apocalypse. Are they really witnessing divine intervention, or just a lactose intolerance worst nightmare? Either way, laughter erupts over the flames, and guests toast to the absurdity of life over a platter filled with indecipherable offerings. Because, fun fact, the Greeks were historically known for their complicated relationship with good taste, often leading to food that was decidedly more perplexing than appetizing. Even Demetra, returning from the outdoor kitchen with a platter that looks suspiciously like an artistic interpretation of a garden gone rogue, admits that she had some issues with the last recipe. Ultimately, the evening winds down as the flaming cheese is engulfed and devoured, leaving guests pondering not so much the quality of the food but the deep philosophical questions of, did they spend the evening in the cosmos of culinary enlightenment, or simply in the orbit of impending food poisoning? So what lessons can we glean from this feast of folly? In ancient Greece, even the garlic could ignite a social uprising, and philosophical debates about cheese may just prove fatal. In conclusion, never doubt the apocalyptic threat of an aloe-alive arrangement, a banquet that shines brightly, but where the culinary karma threatens to take a sharp dive into chaos. Buckle up, audience. It's Athens, 399 BCE, and we're heading to the bustling agora, where the scent of olives mingles with the sharp tang of political scrutiny. Picture it. Bright sun, plenty of shifty-eyed citizens whispering behind their hands, and lunch is about to be served. An uninspired plate of greens. Definitely not your average salad. Enter our protagonist, Socrates, whose hairstyle inspires both reverence and deep confusion within the populace. Today, he has called a meeting not just to philosophize over the meaning of existence, but also to decide the fate of his midday meal. That's right. This salad is no ordinary side dish. It's the culmination of weeks of political maneuvering and potentially a few secret alliances. Typical Greek drama at lunchtime. The atmosphere is electric, or rather, it's charged with the anxiety of 300 citizens who are equally passionate about dressing their greens with either olive oil or something stranger. The sounds of clanking pottery, a quiet weeping of philosophers in the background, and the low simmer of social discontent fill the air. And the smell? Think of a farm during the budding of a toxic flower, mixed with just a hint of what might, or might not, be vinegar. As Socrates unfolds his vision for the Athenian salad, things start to spiral. he reveals the mythical ingredient, the famous golden dressing, purportedly blessed by the goddess Athena herself for promoting civic harmony. Or was it just last week's accidentally fermented mustard? Who knows? But that bounty is crucial, because somewhere buried in this bowl of mixed greens is the fate of democracy itself. The tension rises as Socrates solemnly presents the salad, garnished with thyme obviously. But what catches the communal eye is the dubious-looking golden dressing. Hushed whispers abound. Will the dressing unite Athens or lead to an epic civil war? The philosophers are defensively clutching their lattes as they tremble over the choice of toppings. Then, of course, we descend deeper into the madness. A local orator, who clearly skipped his morning meeting of how to handle conflict without throwing a feta, leaps up and dramatically accuses the dressing of treason. It's all quite theatrical. Everyone is shouting about the virtues of single olive oil versus the horrors of an alleged vinaigrette, a deliberate affront to Athenian values, no less. You could almost hear the gavel come down to rule against the sturdier choice, but we digress. As arguments bubble over, a curious child accidentally spills the golden dressing on the salad rather like a scene from a tragic farce. It seeps into the leaves, and Apollonia, the local oracle, senses something mystical. Suddenly, the salad glows with what can only be described as the essence of fate, power, and dinner regret. Rivals drop their animosity and come together, bonding over mutual olive oil love. Socrates, having achieved his ultimate philosophical quest, simply raises his hands and announces, "Perhaps we are all a little like dressing, strong on our own, better mixed." And so the bowl becomes a symbol. A salad can indeed unite the masses, or at least make them reconsider their factional disputes over lunch. In truth, ancient Athenians' fiascos over salad dressing were very real, as cuisine often bore political and societal significance. Instead of vermouth, their democracy hung upon the choices made by those cavorting with greens. So, what's the takeaway? It might be to just eat your salad and avoid political tiffs unless your dressing is ambiguously divine. Imagine this. The year is 429 BC. The place? A bustling Athenian courtyard, where the scent of olive oil meets the powerful stench of dramatic hubris permeating the atmosphere. The sun blazes overhead, illuminating a banquet table overflowing with delicacies. But unlike your typical family dinner, this spread is enhanced with a compelling side of existential dread. Enter the fabulous Phidias, master sculptor and socialite, who believes tonight's gathering is the perfect chance to outshine Pericles and serve a feast that'll be the gossip of the agora for decades to come. His masterpiece? A giant platter of grilled octopus, glistening ominously like some ancient alien artifact. Now, one might think of octopus as an exotic appetizer, but in Athens, it doubles as a stage for drama and superstition. Was it just the kitchen staff's questionable hygiene from that morning's wine hangover? Or did the gods harbor a vendetta against seafood? As the dinner unfolds, the air is thick with more than just the aroma of charred tentacles. It's also ripe with political tension, like a particularly spicy grape leaf filled with paranoia. Guests murmur, their eyes darting between the octopus and the heavens, wondering whether tonight's culinary display is just a meal or a precursor to divine retribution. "Beware the ink," one guest announces, clutching his throat as if the creature's furious ink sac is poised for revenge. Naturally, this comment sends shockwaves through the crowd. Pass the tartare sauce or face the wrath of Poseidon, am I right? Conversations escalate from the weather to accusations about how often various guests have mispronounced Aeschylus. As the octopus is presented on its ceremonial silver platter, adorned with more olives than a Greek sailor in distress, the main event launches into what historians would later describe as the Great Octopus Debate. What is the proper way to feast on an octopus? Do you eat it in silence to avoid offending the spirit? Or should you engage in a full Shakespearean soliloquy promising eternal loyalty to its tentacles? Each owner of the octopus is convinced their method is of divine origin, with some suggesting it must first undergo a proper blessing. Cue the priest diving into the fray, arms flailing, attempting to exorcise the calamari spirits. Tension peaks when the clock strikes dinner hour. Everyone is still debating, and Phidias stands there, arms crossed, girded for an artistic insult. Suddenly, he loses patience, smashing a chunk of octopus onto his plate in a fit of artistic flair. Tension breaks like a boiled egg, and everyone dives in, fighting each other not just for a share of the entree, but for survival in a culinary battle. As the guests abscond with what remains, the only victor is the octopus, lucky to have dodged a complete confrontation with the grim realities of Athenian taste buds. Mysteriously, it later becomes tradition to host an annual octopus feast on the very spot where civil discord erupted, spawning generations of octopus enthusiasts. And thus, we learn. In ancient Greece, dinner was less about nurturing relationships and more about surviving the evening. So remember, as long as you dodge the ink, your arguments could really bring everyone together, if only for the chance to literally devour your friends. The year is 425 BC. The place is Athens, a city filled with brilliant philosophers, masterful artists, and a truly alarming culture of questionable cuisine. Picture this: a sun-drenched market bustling with citizens, where the air is thick with the aroma of olives, and not the good ones. No, today we shall pay homage to the infamous, mold-riddled relics that not even the gods would dare endorse. As the camera pans across the marketplace, we witness vendors aggressively defending their less-than-stellar wares. The sunlight glints off their questionable produce, most notably a mound of olives, resembling a film festival's tribute to nature's worst bounties. The sound of a distressed goat bleating fills the air, perhaps in commentary on the culinary choices around it. Rumor has it, even the pigeons have developed a serious disdain for the souvlaki. Enter the key characters. Deimos, a local farmer with a financial strategy revolving around olives. Cleon, his sarcastic neighbor, who moonlights as a wine steward, and a gaggle of enthusiastic children who treat the market as if it were an amusement park. Today, however, they're more interested in Deimos' infamous sacred olives, marketed as aphrodisiacs and long thought to be the cause of several mysterious disappearances at nearby dinner parties. The centerpiece of this culinary fiasco? A plate stacked high with what can only be described as chiseled rocks soaked in vinegar with questionable mold directions. The tension kicks in as Deimos prepares for the annual Feast of the Moldy Olive. This isn't just a food festival, it's an Olympic event for the brave-hearted. with local artisans expected to showcase their talents in molds passed down through generations, and the faint scent of fear lurking behind the olives, it becomes clear that something absolutely ludicrous is bound to happen. The festival kicks off with a soothsayer predicting doom and gloom, her words eerily punctuated by the sound of someone being pelted with an unfortunate batch of badly brined olives. As the festival begins, the crowd eagerly anticipates the first bite of Demas's sacred dish. But wait, what's that? A decrepit philosopher from the corner of the market looks on in fear. This is an abomination, a violation of all domestic sensibilities. He tries to warn the masses with a wild gesture, but his arm accidentally knocks over a plate of moldy olives, launching them into the air like a grotesque food fight. In a split second, the crowd morphs into a scene from a horror film. What was initially a light-hearted festival devolves into complete chaos, with patrons dodging, not angry bulls or gladiators, but olives. Olives fly. Some noble souls bravely try to catch them in their tunics, while Demas stands aghast, realizing he may have murdered traditional cuisine. Just as it seems no one will survive the olive apocalypse, a group of children, fueled purely on sugar and youthful arrogance, decides to turn the mass of olives into a highly impromptu water balloon fight. Suddenly, chaos morphs into joy, and laughter erupts as ancient Athenian scholars are splattered with olive juice. The philosophers, sullen holding towels to protect their togas, start to shout mundane philosophical inquiries on the survival of the fittest, which in this case clearly includes a rather enthusiastic child evading gluten in the mess. In the end, the high stakes of the Feast of the Moldy Olive transform into a rather cathartic experience, and the audience learns a most profound lesson. Whenever life gives you moldy olives, leave 'em for the goats. After all, who knew olives could instigate a bonding moment over shared laughter and unintentional chaos? So, let this be engraved into the annals of Athenian history. Pickled products are not always politically correct, so you better have good fame or a love for disaster. If you think it is wise to indulge in these culinary curiosities, you may end up with a philosophy degree in dodging food fear. Picture this. Ancient Greece, 400 BC, a time when philosophy flourished. Democracy was the talk of the town, and the latest fashion trend was defined by how many olives could be held in a toga pocket. Our scene opens in Athens, where it's a scorching day, the kind that makes one reconsider stepping outside unless you enjoy being a human puddle. Welcome to the bustling agora, the heart of Grecian life where traders hawked everything from busts of Socrates to questionable seafood past its prime. The air is a fragrant melange of sweat, olive oil, and something burnt, perhaps the remains of yesterday's burnt offerings or a bad moussaka. Enter Hippocrates, the hotshot physician of the time, not yet a legend, but certainly on his way to becoming the guy whose name you'd hear every other week in medical school classrooms. Today, the celebrated father of medicine is finding his calling amidst chaos, surrounded by various vendors shouting what could only be a mistranslation of their wares. Fresh lettuce, best for your humors. One particularly enthusiastic vendor, draped in a toga vibrant enough to cause a retinal tear, claims that his lettuce can cure everything from a broken heart to, apparently, imperial ambitions. Talk about ambitious salad dressing. Let's pause to marvel at this lettuce, green, crisp, and gloriously innocent. Or is it? The scene soon devolves into pure, delightful absurdity. As Hippocrates examines this very lettuce, little does he know he's about to stumble into a plot thicker than a bowl of Spartan stew. You see, lettuce was considered divine by some, and in hushed conversations was said to possess qualities that could compel anyone to spill their secrets. It was as if a humble salad could turn you into a truth-telling oracle. Amidst the bustling market, rumors whisper through the crowd. Did you hear about the last guy who ate that lettuce? He revealed where he hid the secret recipe for ambrosia. The man responsible, of course, has since mysteriously disappeared, likely enjoying too many days of sunbathing in some distant, toxin-free paradise. And what's that? A mysterious drapery flaps in the wind. It's the cult of the lettuce, sworn protectors of the green leaf, determined to ensure that no one finds out about its fearsome powers. They gather in a conspiratorial huddle under the awning of a particularly shady stall, plotting to guard their leafy riches. Tension rises as they eye Hippocrates with suspicion. Perhaps he's a lecture-loving philosopher eager to spill their secrets to the highest bidder. As our physician makes his way past the fervent cultists, they exchange panicked glances, as if he has a giant salad fork as a weapon. But alas, just when the tension reaches an absurd peak, Hippocrates, in a moment of pure comical mischief, brushes off the suspicious glances, recalls a non-existent medical journal claiming the opposite, that it was not the lettuce but sour grapes that would lead to the downfall of Athenians in the next cerebral debate about democracy. The cult gasps, stunned. A misunderstanding reaches fever pitch. Hippocrates has leveraged his wit to dupe the entire group. The cultists, momentarily thrown off, bicker amongst themselves in a hilarious scramble that resembles children arguing over the last piece of baklava. The lettuce, now deemed cursed by the two rival factions anti-Hippocrates, is discarded, rolling away into the sun, free as a leaf can be on a breezy day. No one would suffer its secretive powers, or rather they would all, quite willingly, avoid ever listening to another vendor claiming, "This salad will change your life." However, a brief historical note. While lettuce might not have turned men into stammering truth-tellers, Hippocrates did indeed promote healthy eating as integral to wellness, emphasizing moderation, except in the case of his garlic-drenched lamb, which was just a personal favorite. And the punchline. In ancient Greece, you'd rather risk an awkward conversation over a mixed green salad than a deep-seated conspiracy where raw veggies could make you spill more than just your food woes. Remember, the biggest risks in life aren't poison-tipped arrows. They're those deceptively vibrant salads lurking at your local agora. Picture this. The year is 431 BC. You've just emerged from a crowded agora, your belly rumbling louder than the wind in a Spartan's hair. The sun blazes down, and the heady mix of olive oil and sandalwood wafts through the air, mingling delightfully with the scent of, well, let's just say whatever happens to be rotting near the amphitheater. Welcome to Athens, where you can taste democracy and the occasional hint of spoiled fish, the signature dish of many an unsuspecting visitor. Here, in our historical documentary, grab your toga and steel your stomach as we dish out the scandalous truth about ancient Greek cuisine. As you stroll through this sun-drenched city, the atmosphere crackles with the anticipation of feast or famine. The soaring columns of the Parthenon cast long shadows over the hustle of barter and banter, while the marketplace is bustling with vendors hawking wares. On one side, a burly merchant juggles amphorae filled with dubious wine, while a cantankerous woman outside a bakery hurls rancid loaves at children too slow to grab them. But the pièce de résistance of your culinary adventure is not the wine or bread. It's the famed dish, pulse, essentially a savory porridge sprinkled with herbs and, depending on your luck, the occasional insect. Today, you're in for a special treat. You're invited to witness the ancient ritual of the Great Pulse-Off, an annual event where locals compete for the best pulse. The crowd buzzes eagerly with hope and dread, for during such events, anything can happen. This isn't just about bragging rights, it's also about securing your place in society and maybe avoiding an exile that comes from a poorly prepared dish. Participants line up, clutching their clay bowls of pulse with the fervor of gladiators entering the arena. The judges? A group of esteemed philosophers who've tasted more forms of gruel than anyone should dare imagine. They philosophize intensely about texture, flavor, and the soul of pulse itself. Behold, the essence of human existence is encapsulated in this dish, declares one philosopher, raising a spoon like a scepter as all around, peasants gasp in awe. The woman beside you, however, is twinging her nose. Could it be an uninvited guest in the soup? The haunting whisper of a rogue cricket? The tension builds as the clock ticks down. Then, enter the unthinkable. With only moments left, one contestant trips and flings their bowl across the arena, splattering pulse on a passing dignitary who promptly demands satisfaction. Suddenly, the event escalates into a full-blown food fight. Underneath the cloud of herbal porridge, philosophers' theories are tossed aside as morality is quickly replaced by mayhem, and stray dogs begin gleefully populating the scene. Amid the chaos, our contestants scramble to salvage their dignity, struggling to don their togas and dodge flying pulse while trying to keep it all together in a war of epic culinary proportions. Where's the salad, you wonder, as mud, beans, and philosophical inquiries blend together into one delightful disaster? By the end, the judges have decided on a winner, but not before sliding in a final philosophy. All is fair in pulse and war. As the onlookers disperse, you wonder how anyone can thrive in such a culinary crisis. In reality, historians point out that ancient Greeks had sophisticated palates and were known for various dishes. But we're not here for facts, are we? What's the moral of the story, you ask? Never doubt the splendor of a Greek food fight. It's educational, entertaining, and will definitely ruin your favorite sandals. So remember, in the world of ancient Greece, if you're going to taste a dish, just be prepared for the unexpected sprinkle of chaos. Picture it. Ancient Greece, 431 BCE, high noon. The sun blazes ominously over Athens, casting shadows long enough to serve as future courtroom evidence. The air is thick with the scent of olive oils, occasionally pierced by the sounds of artisans shouting dubious compliments while chiseling faces of the most intimidating gods one could imagine. Dionysus getting a particularly flamboyant beard today. In the heart of the city, an extravagant banquet is underway, hosted by none other than a tyrant named Theodorus, known for his love of wine and his even greater fear of being poisoned by an overzealous admirer, or worse, a disgruntled sous chef. As the guests, who are definitely not reading the room, recline on their couches, the table before them boasts enough food to feed a small army, or at least an entire philosophy school for 3 days. Heaps of roasted lamb, trays of olives, and an absurd pyramid of honey-drenched pastries stacked so precariously one could argue they embody Plato's theory of forms. As laughter and the sounds of resentment fill the air, the squabbling guests reveal their true colors. Enter stage left. Dexios the butcher, a man with a story for every dish, none of which ever included enrichment through schooling. He boldly proclaims, "Nothing says trust like a good portion of questionable meat." Annoyed murmurs rise from the crowd, hinting that Dexios may have spent more time taming goats than mastering the art of diplomacy. But fear not, for amid this culinary chaos lurks the heart of our dilemma: the wine. Ah yes, the wine. Thick, rich, and as potent as a full-fledged philosophical debate turned ugly. Greeks loved their wine, but what they loved even more, a good conspiracy involving poison. Was it just imagination, or did Theodorus secretly eye his goblet every time the lady from the second seat took a sip? Not that he didn't trust his guests. It was just that the locals had a strange way of expressing affection through foodborne toxins. And as expected, with wine comes overindulgence, leading our craftsman of fear, Theodorus, to institute a ritual of probing into his guests' glasses. Every full goblet was treated as an invitation for chatter. Me? No, no. I'm not here to toast to your misfortune. He'd laugh nervously, while ensuring his own glass was ensured of divine safety. Brimming with sharp wit, tension, and enough emotional baggage to fill an amphitheater, our banquet reaches its crescendo. Suddenly, a raven swoops down, steals a honey bun right from the terrified hands of the host, and its shadow covers the table ominously. Theodorus, convinced of impending doom, recoils and demands a monologue about fates and omens. Silence falls over the gathered crowd as an elder tries to soothe fears with a rather feeble quip about how better to die in pursuit of pastries than sobriety. Finally, just as tempers peak and the air thickens with the weight of existential dread, a fox wanders in, devouring what it can. This common woodland creature, seemingly unfazed by the chaos, dashes for the leftover pastries, causing a ripple of laughter and easing the tension. Perhaps it was prophetic. A sign that all these shabby tyrants and bitter philosophers shouldn't take their fates or wine selection so seriously. With gastronomical drama finally dulled by laughter, the guests venture happily toward the nearest bistro, a cheerful adventure to continue questioning life while sipping on more trustworthy wines. And what lesson can we extract from all this? Nah, who needs lessons? Just remember, in ancient Greece, the only thing more perilous than your wine selection might be the philosophers arguing nearby. In the bustling streets of ancient Athens, the year is 430 BC, and the scent of trouble wafts through the air, mingling with that of ripe olives and sweat. Picture this: a dramatic amphitheater packed with rowdy citizens, all waiting to witness the entertainment. An event that would decide more than just the fate of a few grapes, but potentially the fate of a political platform. In the center stage, lined with marble so shiny it could double as a poor man's mirror, a jury of local citizens sits, all glued to the latest scoop of who can ruin whom. On this particular day, the drama revolves around a basket of grapes. But these aren't just any grapes. Legend whispers that these grapes are from the venerable Chios vineyard, the Bacchus of vine's treasures, and somehow they've made their way into the ordinary hands of an ordinary farmer named Plutarch. Ah, Plutarch, as unassuming as a man can be, except for that hefty set of eyebrows that could double as a dense shrub. As the sun beams defiantly into the amphitheater, the tension in the air is palpable. The citizens are snacking on figs, whispering eager conspiracies of Dionysian celebrations and political vendettas. The only sounds punctuating the juicy gossip are the murmurs of the jury, who are surprisingly intrigued by this extremely pressing grape debate. For what could be more scandalous than grapes? Plutarch steps forward nervously, grasping his basket as if it contained the meanings of life and death, though in reality it was just a handful of grapes he claimed were pilfered. "I did not acquire these grapes from the vendor's stall," he exclaims, spittle flying with dramatic exaggeration. "I merely borrowed them to promote the Dionysian celebration next week." The crowd gasps, clearly wondering how borrowing involves the potential for a public hanging. Of course, it wouldn't be a real ancient Greek fiasco without a series of absurd rituals. Rumor has it that before Plutarch even got to the amphitheater, he was subjected to a quirky purification process. 7 priests had to wave their torches around him while reciting an archaic hymn that, let's be honest, could have been rewritten as "Don't Get Caught in a Grape Scandal 101. Instead of making him feel better, Plutarch was left praying the grapes wouldn't return to haunt him. Tension mounts as a soothsayer enters the stage, ready to examine the grapes through a preposterous ritual involving chugging wine, reading the leftovers from the goblet, and upstairs neighbors complaining about the loud dance parties. As the soothsayer squints suspiciously at the grapes, the crowd holds their collective breath. Finally, he declares, "These grapes surely hail from Chios. Toss that man in the cell. Unless, of course, he fulfills a great vineyard prophecy by kicking their fermented behinds to the curb." The saying was less than clear, and even the Athenian citizens weren't sure if they should clap or flee. Just when it seems Plutarch's life hangs in the balance, as metaphorical as a dramatic amphitheater scene gets, a rival farmer shouts from the back, "I grow better grapes." Drawing the crowd's attention, he hurls his own measly cluster of mediocre grapes towards Plutarch, which astonishingly becomes the defining moment. In a scene reminiscent of chaotic salad tossing at dinner parties, the crowd erupts into laughter, as citizens question how better grapes could even exist without the magic of Dionysian influence. Plutarch, undeterred and suddenly suave, catches that grenade of a grape with his bare hands, holding it aloft for all to see like some messianic grape savior. With chaos bubbling and the citizens wrapped in laughter, the magistrate shrugs, mumbles something about the failure of the grape industry, and simply dismisses the case as too fruity to prosecute. Stand down, Plutarch. The day belongs to the droll dominance of grapes. History teaches us that in ancient Athens, one must either learn to juggle conspiracies with the skill of a professional chef, or simply avoid public meetings about potentially treacherous grapes altogether. Lesson to carry forward: always know your winery. Or maybe just stick to apples. Imagine this. The year is 400 BC, in a sun-drenched olive grove somewhere in the picturesque hills of ancient Greece. The air is thick with the scent of ripe olives and the earthy aroma of impending theft. The sun hangs precariously in a sky that's as blue as an unbothered deity's eyes, casting shadows on a scene that could be a masterwork of those pesky ancient artists trying to capture this very moment in marble or clay. Introducing our key players, a gang of would-be thieves clad in togas, though don't let that fool you. They'd give modern-day bandits a run for their gold. We have Thalia, the self-proclaimed mastermind known for her equally self-proclaimed wits, who believes she's about to pull off the heist of the century. Next is Nico, a muscle-bound moron who struggles to remember exactly which way is up, yet can somehow lift an entire ancient olive press single-handedly. Last, but certainly not least, is Lysander, the nervous lookout with a penchant for toga fashion disasters and an obsession with Oedipus stories. Now, the underground buzz around town is that the local olive oil was dubbed liquid gold, for more reason than its shiny hue. Best for salad, but also most effective in lubricating household contraptions that could rival a modern-day Swiss Army knife. Naturally, the gang believed a hefty supply could pave a profitable route to a life of luxury that would make even Dionysus jealous. As they creep through the grove, the rustling leaves sound like whispers of the gods warning against this audacious act. The shadows stretch long as soon as the first fruits of their labor come into reach. The grove smells of something sweet, possibly the scent of success, or possibly the cheap wine they had drunk to muster the courage. The immediate tension prickles like static electricity in the air, with the stakes as high as a Spartan battle cry. They quickly pour the oil into a series of clay jars, imagining the riches, only to be thwarted by a community of snobby goats that seem to regard their presence with a mixture of disdain and mild curiosity. It's not long before Nico tries to shoo them away, and in a moment of goat-thwarting disaster, he slips, crashing into several carefully stacked jars. Oil sprays like a fountain, covering him from head to toe, a slick visage of folly that would later haunt his nightmares. But then, an unexpected twist. The owner of the grove, an elderly man, emerges out of the shadows, clutching a gnarled stick and a surprisingly vivid imagination that could only be rivaled by the sirens of the sea. "Stop, in the name of Zeus!" he cries, his dramatic flair bordering on performance art, complete with gesticulated motions that suggest he'd been practicing this very moment for years. The thieves pause, oil dripping from their hair, realizing this wasn't going to end well. In a frenzied panic, Thalia attempts to negotiate, only to find herself outmatched by the old man's enthusiasm for getting an audience. As he spins tales of his youth, tales so compelling that they almost convince the thieves to join him in a life of modest agricultural gardening instead, the goats, sensing the distraction, seize the opportunity to superciliously munch on the spilled oil-soaked clay jars, as if mocking human sophistication at its finest. Eventually, the gang finds themselves not behind bars, but instead rendered the unwilling assistance in the elder's quest to reclaim his herd and maintain the harvest. Their heist quickly devolves into a disorganized olive oil production workshop, generating enough oil to rival a beauty product line that would show up centuries later with a promise to cure every woe women could think of. Historically speaking, it's interesting to note that olives were not only dietary staples, but also a currency of sorts. So you could say, in a way, they enriched the community while simultaneously impoverishing our hapless thieves. So what's the takeaway in the end? Never plan a heist in a toga, and always assume the goats have the upper hand in any operation involving liquid gold. Cue the dramatic music. The year, 404 BC. The setting, a crowded Athenian tavern, where the scent of cheap wine hangs in the air with the same enthusiasm as a drunken philosopher's opinions. The place? A dive that would make even the most disheveled modern frat house look like a five-star restaurant. The ambiance is lively, or at least as lively as a place packed with men who can't tell if they're laughing or choking on the remnants of last week's fish stew. Lanterns flicker precariously overhead, casting shadows that dance like echoes of lost dreams. A cacophony of raucous laughter, slurred speech, and the occasional argument about the best way to prophesy the future creates a backdrop worthy of a tragicomedy. Or perhaps just a very unfortunate episode of Who's Had Too Much Ouzo. At the center of this chaos stands our key player, Dionysius, an esteemed wine merchant whose entire reputation hinges on the quality of his Assyrian vintage, praised far and wide, if it didn't send you into a drunken stupor, that is. Clad in a loosely draped toga, Dionysius is balancing a jug of wine so large it might as well have been a small child and recounting tales of his excessive drinking adventures while trying to impress a table of uninterested patrons. The food? Well, it consisted mainly of hard bread and olives that had likely considered committing suicide rather than continue existing under such culinary oppression. As the night wore on, tension began to brew. You see, Dionysius's wine was rumored to have magical properties, enabling men to finally commune with the gods, provided the gods were in the mood for drunken ramblings. But Dionysius had just caught wind of insidious whispers that rival merchants were plotting to steal his recipe. The plot thickened like an overly reduced sauce. Under the dim light, a group of sinister-looking men huddled together, each looking like they had just stepped off the set of a low-budget horror movie. They began an elaborate ritual to summon both courage and deceit. A thick, smoke-like haze filled the air as they tossed in odd ingredients, likely leftover scraps from dinner or possibly the last remains of some unfortunate soul who challenged Dionysius to a drinking contest. They believed their scheme would crown them the true lords of winemaking, only to realize they had wasted their evening on bad olives and broken dreams. The tavern filled with excitement as the rival merchants made their move. Intrigue peaked as Dionysius, oblivious to the escalating danger, began a revision of his poetry regarding the splendor of wine, using language so flowery it could bloom in a drought. Just when the plot seemed at its most absurd, the thieves burst into riotous laughter, mocking their failed heist and proclaiming that they could just order Dionysius's vintage at half the price. In an ironic twist of fate, it turned out Dionysius himself had been mixing the secret ingredient, watered-down wine. His storied reputation was built on a foundation of acceptable mediocrity and a healthy mistrust of untrustworthy suppliers, rendering the entire heist laughably moot. So, how did it end? As Dionysius ranted about the virtues of authenticity in winemaking, the rival merchants realized they could simply bottle the mystery of a mediocre vintage and market it as authentic Athenian experience. A scandalous success was born out of what could have been tragedy, and in true comedic fashion, everyone ended up drinking Dionysius's watered-down brew in the very same tavern. Cheers to the hero who just wanted to survive the night with his reputation and dignity hanging by a thread. What's the moral of the story? Well, in ancient Greece, if you want to be a successful wine merchant, just remember one thing. Your competition will likely be more interested in marketing malarkey than stealing your secrets. And maybe dilute your wine, just a tad. Prepare your senses for a scene laden with excess, both in food and stupidity. It's 400 BCE, and we find ourselves in a lavishly decorated dining room in Athens, where the scent of wine, particularly the dubious vintage from last year, mingles with roasted lamb and the regrettable aroma of olive oil that hasn't seen a proper olive since the last Olympic Games. The sounds of laughter and slightly off-key lyres ricochet off the marble walls, while a long table, laden with what can only be described as a food fort, occupies the space. And by fort, I mean hazardous territory. Enter the Greek male aristocrat, decked out in his best, which is a toga so elaborate it might just have its own Instagram account. His task? To wine, dine, and philosophically overthink the meaning of life while negotiating the culinary nightmare that is a traditional symposium feast. The spread? Let's just say it's an impressive display of everything you never wanted to know you could eat. Honey-glazed, judge-veiled snails, grilled octopus with a side of existential crisis, and an unholy amount of boiled greens floating suspiciously in a sauce that might be a salad dressing or a chemically enhanced disaster. As the attendees prepare for their meal, the palpable tension arises as a certain anxiety grips the Athenian elite. Will the food actually taste like something edible? Or is everyone about to experience a bout of explosive indigestion worthy of a Greek tragedy? Not to mention the absurd rituals surrounding food safety. You would think a symposium would be just about debauchery and brain-bending thoughts, not a covert operation to avoid the wrath of an angry goddess of food poisoning. Before the feast, an argument erupts over the proper way to sacrifice a goat for dinner, which involves vague chants, a questionable amount of dancing, a spoonful of garum, the ancient, harsh condiment of choice, and a fervent belief that the gods wouldn't want you to cause indigestion during their dinner party. And heaven forbid you run afoul of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, who would smite you to the next century if she felt your dinner was less than respectful to her favorite potatoes. Things spiral into absurd hilarity when a young philosopher loudly declares, "What does it mean to eat?" and then promptly ups the stakes by offering the depressed lamb you're currently feasting upon a philosophical underpinning for its own demise. A game of one-upmanship ensues, where typically rational men lose their collective minds, bickering whether it's better to embrace the meat of a sacrificed animal or the deep existential weight of the decision. Finally, chaos rears its head when it becomes apparent that a few of the attendees have taken an uninvited liking to the infamous spiced wine. You know, the kind that often leads to a regretful morning, running around shouting about democracy and metaphorical truths. In an ironically poetic twist, an unfortunate guest, too intoxicated to comprehend the concept of moderation, instead decides to dunk his head into the banquet spread, temporarily confusing the course of appetizers with a pool party. Now imagine being a goat in that moment of collective enlightenment. Ultimately, the symposium devolves into either a philosophy seminar revolution or an avant-garde performance art piece dedicated to the effects of wine, where wisdom is often as elusive as the last untouched basket of bread. When the twilight descends on Athens, the only remnants of the grand feast are wild stories and a host of bellies grumbling louder than echoes in a Greek amphitheater, making for the year's best tale. So, what have we gleaned from this absurd historical exhibit? That dining in ancient Greece was a delightful blend of indulgent pleasure, wrapped in existential dread, served with a side of potential divine wrath and drunken karaoke. Let's just say, if you thought Yelp reviews were tough today, you should have seen the ones from ancient Greece. Always double-check the spiced wine. It might just contribute to your downfall. Picture this. The year is 426 BC. The place? A crowded agora where a dazzling array of garishly dressed Athenians are debating the merits of democracy while simultaneously plotting who will casually vanish before the next festival. Meanwhile, in the distance, a rather grand festival dedicated to Dionysus is about to begin. The air is thick with the mingling scents of burnt offerings, overripe figs, and an unholy amount of olive oil. Enter our protagonist, Lysander, an ordinary philosopher who believes he will grace this grand celebration with nothing but wit and a bottomless appetite. Sporting a toga that barely clings to his waist, he saunters into the main feast, greeted by the sound of laughter, the clinking of goblets, and the collective hope of surviving the evening without completely embarrassing oneself. The centerpiece of this culinary chaos? A gigantic cauldron filled to the brim with an olive oil concoction that even the gods would find excessive. This oily libation was thought to bestow youth, health, and absolutely no moderation. The sight? Like a golden pool of liquid dreams, astonishingly shimmering under the flickering torches, beckoning the hungry crowds. But what the revelers don't realize is that this is not just olive oil. Oh no, it's been meticulously spiced and mixed with questionable herbs, each supposedly blessed by a priest of Dionysus. A coup, but of culinary effects. What was an innocent dip for bread quickly transformed into a slippery descent into Hellenic madness. Among the laughter, the olfactory invasion of olives, and the constant bellowing of opa, the tension brews. Some citizens, suspicious of new trends in food they can't pronounce, begin to whisper. Did that last batch have too much thyme? Was someone trying to get rid of the competition? With superstitions raised to fever pitch, heated arguments break out. Doubt spreads like fire, as one philosopher declares that such a mixture has surely angered the gods. As waves of paranoia ripple through the crowd, everyone is on high alert for signs of impending gastric rebellion. Thus begins the festival's downward spiral. A few brave or foolhardy attendees plunge into the oily depths with their pitas, mouths open wide, only for it to lead to a symphony of choking sounds and dribbled oil cascading down chins like confused waterfalls. Grapes are suddenly flying as prudent guests try to deflect the attention away from the evident gastric hazards presented by the oil. Laughter turns to shrieks and someone yells, "Help! I'm being poisoned by a salad dressing." And then, just when you think doom is upon them, a young woman, Dialectra, unexpectedly rises above the chaos. She boldly declares to the revelers, "Fear not, it's just olive oil." Clutching a loaf of bread, she dips with confidence and offers it out as an olive branch, a gesture both literal and figurative, as the crowd watches in horror before tentatively joining in. One by one, the guests realize that this oily downfall was but a mischief of taste, not treason. Amid the clattering of dishes and the returned vigor of indulging in the excessive olive oil, Lysander, now covered head to toe in oil, realizes the key lesson of the soiree. It wasn't just about the food, but about trusting in community and the courage to embrace the absurd. Who knew that a collective fear of olive oil could be the source of entertainment? So what did we learn here? In ancient Greece, there's no such thing as too much olive oil, unless, of course, it is being hoarded for a coup. Then you'd better keep your bread at arm's length. Picture this: 5th century BC, Athens. The sun is setting, casting a golden hue over the Acropolis, but even the gods have decided to avert their eyes because tonight is not just an average evening, it's the annual Festival of Olives. Yes, a festival dedicated to tiny fruits that herald the imminent danger of providing sticky fingers and the potential for grave social faux pas. As the attendees gather, the atmosphere crackles with excitement, mixed with that delightful aroma of ripe olives and the pungent whiff of worry lingering in the air. The sounds of raucous laughter twirl through the warm evening, punctuated by spontaneous recitations of epic poetry and the occasional Ode to the Olive being sung off-key. In attendance, we have our main cast of characters. Charon the haggler, a merchant with a price for everything except good taste. Zoe the uninvited, a guest so infamous she's banned from 3 neighboring city-states. And Lysander, the ever-optimistic organizer of this culinary catastrophe who believes any vegetable deserves its own festival. Now, to the pièce de résistance. The olive table, a long wooden structure draped in olive leaves, showcasing various olive-based dishes for the masses to devour. We've got olives stuffed with herbs, olives swimming in vinegary doom, and, of course, the infamous olive oil, a liquid so precious that it was once used as currency. The irony is rich, spilling over like well olive oil. But it wouldn't be ancient Greece without a healthy dose of tension fueled by paranoia and superstition surrounding their beloved olives. Legend has it that each olive was blessed by the goddess Athena herself. And to disrespect an olive, say by mixing it with an unwanted ingredient, could unleash divine retribution. Shudders ripple through the crowd as Karen deliberates whether to introduce feta, the ultimate betrayal. As the evening progresses, Lysander's zeal skyrockets, proclaiming ominously, "Tonight we shall eat without fear." Little does he know, panic ensues when a particularly enthusiastic vendor declares an olive to have been stolen from the Garden of Hell. The crowd gasps, as though he just proclaimed the arrival of plague. Conspiracies begin to swirl like the olive-infused fog settling in. Was Athena actually among them as a reincarnated olive, ready to smite anyone who dared misuse her sacred bounty? The stakes are raised, leading to a ridiculous olive-scooping contest where contestants race to collect the sacred olives without angering the gods, a feat made nearly impossible by the fact that they are covered in slippery olive brine. Then, in a shocking twist worthy of a Greek tragedy, the olive vendor stumbles, spilling an entire bucket of olives onto the ground. Gasps echo, and chaos erupts as people slip, slide, and launch themselves into a sea of olives, while invoking both divine names and questionable curses. In the ensuing madness, someone yells, "If you can't beat the olives, join them," only for the participants to land face first into the very delicacy they were fearing. An unexpected resolution unfolds. Truth reigns supreme. The olives were truly not an extraction from the depths of Hades, but merely delicious, and they taste even better with a side of humility. Ecstasy gives way to laughter as the villagers recognize that the food they feared was nothing more than a gluten-free excuse to gather and bond over their absurdity. After all, what good is a festival if not to highlight that sometimes the most devastating fears come from your own imagination? And thus, we wrap it up with the moral of our delightful disaster. The gods may be fussy over fruit, but communal bonding over humble olives is a sport even the most paranoid should indulge in, just without roller skating through them. Picture this. Ancient Athens, 431 BC, a bustling agora filled with townsfolk who are undeniably excited yet suspiciously preoccupied with the latest gossip about the state of their vegetable patch. The sun is shining, the burgers of yogurt are glimmering with a honey glaze, and the smell? Oh, it's a delightful mix of roasted lamb, fragrant herbs, and just a hint of something acrid, like an undercooked cabbage. Enter our protagonist, Cleon the farmer, an earnest yet often bewildered local farmer who buys into the popular superstition that cabbage, yes, cabbage, is actually the embodiment of Dionysian chaos. Why cabbage, you ask? Well, it turns out, its distinctive smell is believed by many to unleash wild hallucinations, unwarranted paranoia, and worst of all, unsolicited dance parties. Perfect for the festival season. Less ideal for a snack after a long day of toil. The agora is filled with laughter of merchants hawking their wares, craftsmen clanging away on their latest bronze work, and children running briskly, their feet slapping on the dust-packed ground like a dramatic garden play reenacted by pantsless actors. In terms of culinary delights, sturdy bowls of lentil stew and lovely plates of olive tapenade litter the stalls. However, the most sought-after item, Cleon's mysterious, eerily, unnaturally green cabbage. But wait, rumors spread that this is no ordinary cabbage. According to neighborhood lore, a rival farmer, suspicious of Cleon's impending gastronomic glory, had cursed the crop to unleash devastation upon any who dared eat it. Enter the town's self-appointed oracle, a rather bedraggled lady named Chione, whose ability to produce vague prophecies made her the ultimate authority. She confidently declared that those who consumed Cleon's cabbage would become possessed by the spirits of drunken partygoers past, forever destined to dance upon tables while singing Ode to Cleos until the sun rises. The tension builds as Cleon suffers under the scrutiny of dubious townsfolk, one of whom, an overly dramatic merchant named Damis, faints at the mere thought of potential possession, clutching his pearls, or Greek equivalent, while another scuttles away to concoct a remedy that likely involves boiling it in ancient tears. As the sun settles low, painting everything in shades of dramatic orange, Cleon prepares to unveil his prized cabbage at the much-anticipated first annual Athens Cabbage Festival, or the unfortunate downfall of his reputation expo. Just as a crowd gathers, armed with decorated wooden spoons and slightly terrifying enthusiasm, something utterly ridiculous unfolds. The actual oracle is so caught up in the pre-festival excitement that she accidentally digs into the very cabbage she had declared cursed. Eyes widen, breath halts, and for a moment, it seems Athens itself holds its breath, collectively holding their cups of watered-down wine as if an epic tragedy is about to unfold. But Chione bites in and lets out a surprisingly satisfied moan. It turns out the cabbage was simply well seasoned with a hint of garlic and strangely invigorating. The spirits of drunkenness don't possess her. Instead, she begins an impromptu dance of joy, a scene reminiscent of a Broadway musical devoid of any understanding of choreography. Suddenly, the townsfolk join in, picking up their plates and joining in. The young and hopeful dance merrily around Cleon, making him a reluctant centerpiece of a cacophonous celebration. And what about our vegetable rival? He slinks away, shoulders slumped, defeated by the power of culinary frivolity, while Cleon looks flabbergasted and oddly triumphant. So, the moral of the story? Cabbage. It might just be the key to a raucous celebration, or the origin of your neighbor's next social media fail. Just remember, maybe leave the potato salad on the side next time. It could save you from unexpected midnight table dancing. Picture this: ancient Athens, circa 500 BCE. Sunlight pours down like a spotlight on a stage of absurdities, illuminating a bustling agora filled with philosophers, merchants, and the occasional drunkard proclaiming he has found the meaning of life in his half-eaten loaf of bread. What's the occasion? A grand banquet to celebrate the latest philosophical debate. Or, as the Athenians called it, let's see how much wine we can drink before someone starts questioning democracy. The atmosphere is thick with the rich smells of roasted lamb and honeyed figs, mingling disturbingly with the not-so-pleasant odors of unwashed bodies and seafood, whose freshness is best measured in the number of days since it swam in the Aegean Sea. Enter the toastmaster, a fellow with more ego than sense, adorned in a toga that looks suspiciously like last week's napkin. His job? To ensure that everyone gets their fill of wine and gets in as many philosophical puns as possible before the night inevitably devolves into drunken bickering about the nature of existence. Spoiler alert, no one wins. And what of food? Ah, the food. Next to the grand centerpiece, a roast pig apparently sacrificed to honor some deity of hunger, is platters of delicacies. Olives the size of small stones, cheese that could double as a doorstop, and bowls of something green that suspiciously resembles the contents of an unkempt garden. The pièce de résistance? A series of mystery dishes proudly labeled "What is that?" A culinary adventure that might lead you to enlightenment, or, at the very least, regret. Tension mounts as the evening progresses. The Athenians abide by a curious ritual known as the ritual of the unwanted leftovers, where each guest is expected to take a bite of this questionable delicacy lest it cause bad luck for the entire household. No one wants to be the first to refuse, fearing that the gods of gastronomy would cast them into a culinary purgatory where all meals are served cold and devoid of flavor. One brave, or perhaps foolhardy guest lifts a suspiciously gelatinous mass to his mouth. The air hangs thick with anxiety, and a certain odor reminiscent of old gym socks. Suddenly, an owl, famous for its unfortunate tendency to swoop into events and create absolute chaos, decides this is the moment to make its grand entrance. It lands squarely on the roast pig, and for a brief moment, all eyes are glued to the avian spectacle. Panic ensues. Guests scream. Someone shouts, "Attica!" while others simply begin defending their plates. The noble roast pig, once a beacon of celebratory feasting, now holds a squawking owl hostage in its crispy skin as the toastmaster desperately tries to regain control. Though it's rather clear he lost any semblance of dignity hours ago. Just as quickly as it began, the chaos recedes when the owl, apparently unimpressed with the banquet, takes flight, leaving behind a few feathers and the profound realization that perhaps mystery dishes are best left unexamined. Where once there was tension, now laughter erupts. The atmosphere shifts from dread to camaraderie as they toast to the steadfast survival of good food, bad wine, and uninvited owls. Interestingly enough, this rowdy gathering culminates in a grand debate about whether the gods truly care about their dietary choices, or if they simply enjoy watching mortals squirm. Who would have thought? In the end, as each guest drinks one last cup of wine, they unanimously decide that if life gives you mystery meat, make a salad and call it a day. So what have we learned from this evening of excess? Next time you're invited to an ancient feast, always bring your own snacks and avoid mystery dishes at all costs. You never know when an owl might drop in to steal the show, or your appetite. Imagine, if you will, the sun-drenched terraces of ancient Athens. The year is 431 BC, and you, brave soul, have decided to partake in a banquet, hosted by none other than Socrates himself. Yes, that Socrates. The one with the penchant for long-winded discussions and sipping deeply from the cup of philosophical musings, but not before sampling whatever delectables are brought forth onto the table. And what better way to start than with a platter of roasted goat? Never mind the goat's subtle ambition to be reborn as a philosopher. It's more about the incredible side effects of a less-than-stellar cooking process. The air is thick with the smell of charred meat mingling with overly ripe figs, the kind of figs only found when philosophers are busy bickering about the perfect cooking temperature, while fires sputter carelessly beneath a disinterested spit-bearer. And, as the grapes ferment in their makeshift wine vats, a choir of cicadas serenades your very existence. Nature's way of telling you that you probably made a terrible choice coming here instead of to the taverna down the street. Now, let's turn our attention to Socrates, the evening's guest of honor. Clad in his customary robe, frayed and slightly suspicious, he languidly gestures at the crowd, a ragtag collection of Athenians draped in their finest attire, which, let me remind you, still looks suspiciously like bedsheets. This isn't just a dinner, it's a session of truth-seeking through appetizers, where the only thing getting roasted more than the meat is your self-esteem by Socrates' sharp wit. As we cue the thought-provoking table talk, at what point does a goat become a philosophical topic? Tension rises when the goat suddenly resembles the reincarnation of some long-forgotten deity. The awkward idleness between bites gives room to contemplate superstitions, one of which claims that if a sacrificial goat isn't cooked to perfection, the gods will unleash their wrath upon those present. Terrifying. If that doesn't send the guests into a frenzy clinging to their wine cups, I don't know what will. And then, a twist of fate worthy of the finest Greek tragedy. Just mid-sentence, Socrates pauses, his eyes narrowing like he's caught a whiff of impending doom, or perhaps the goat. With flamboyant hand gestures, he proclaims, "If any of you choke on this goat, it will only prove that we are destined to be less wise than a herd of sheep." And as he attempts to demonstrate the noble art of goat eating, which he understands, is laden with the grave responsibility of wisdom, disaster strikes. The goat starts to slide from his plate with the finesse of a well-oiled Olympian athlete. It glides right past him to land at the feet of a rather startled Plato, who stares in disbelief as the culinary crown of the evening somehow devolves into an impromptu wrestling match between philosopher and goat. In the chaos, one spectator's wine cup tips over, creating a comical red river that flows toward a rather unaware Aristotle, who spends the next 5 minutes arguing with a nearby grape about its intention. True to form, he sidesteps the legend of the goat altogether. Meanwhile, Socrates, fully dedicated to his craft, continues arguing with the half-eaten dish about its innate value and livelihood, while the rest of the guests try to forget that the goat momentarily disrupted the entire philosophical discourse that started it all. In a matter of moments, a servant shuffles awkwardly to the side, offering a plate of olives, the perfect palate cleanser for what has now accumulated into a greater philosophical inquiry into the nature of futility. Socrates, quote jumping from memory, declares, "Everything is either a feast for thought or a mere footnote to history. So, what is the lesson here, dear audience?" In ancient Greece, choosing dinner companions was as vital as choosing your last meal in the depths of a claustrophobic Mediterranean tomb. If you ever find yourself in a banquet gone wrong, just remember, the true tragedy isn't the goat. It's realizing that at the end of the night, you might be left with nothing but a few bruised olives and lighter philosophical burdens. Freshly plucked from doom's very own orchard, we find ourselves in a sun-soaked vineyard of ancient Greece, around 400 BC, where the air is thick not just with the scent of sun-ripened grapes, but also with the stench of hubris and existential dread remixed. As Dionysius would say, if you're not drinking, you might as well be dead. But cheers! The scene unfolds beneath the shadow of magnificent columns, where revelers gather for what might be the most dreadfully delightful day of their lives. A glorious mix of sound, the distant clang of lyres, the raucous laughter of citizens whose wisdom has clearly been fermented, and the joyous barking of dogs clearly having their own simple yet contented existential crisis. The guests await the grand feast, lured by the main attraction, a heaping platters of whole roasted sheep, grapes bursting as though they might just have a story to tell. Key characters in this ancient tragedy include an overly enthusiastic wine merchant named Cleon, who considers himself a connoisseur, the kind of guy who sometimes talks to his wines as if they can hear him. Next up is Philon, a philosopher whose life motto is to question everything, including the quality of the grapes. His hair is long enough to be a controversy on its own, and his tunic is perpetually stained with either wine or regret. And, finally, there's the painfully awkward yet undeniably charming farmhand, Lysander, who is currently on the run from a flock of very judgmental sheep. But wait, what is this? As the grapes are presented, seemingly innocent and ripe for the picking, the tension simmers closer to boiling. Cleon insists that an emerging cold snap is nothing compared to the misfortune of drinking tainted wine. Thus begins an entire afternoon of grap-related panic. Philon, holding a handful of grapes like they're tiny landmines, expresses his deepest fears about the fruits of the vine possibly being cursed by the gods. What if a vengeful Dionysius decided to punish us for mixing our red and white wines, he proclaims, while people around him simultaneously consider the implications of his musings on their dinner plans. A nearby oracle, a rather sassy woman named Cassandra, who moonlights as a food critic, chimes in with all the gravitas of a woman who knows too much. If you eat these grapes, beware. For the last time I tried a ripe cluster, it led to a case of the most tragic poetry to have ever been written. the crowd gasps, shivering at the memory of their own prior misfortunes involving fermented concoctions. Meanwhile, poor Lysander, still dodging sheep like they're arrows from a vengeful Cupid, is roped into the chaos when the sheep he's been running from break into the banquet just in time for this fracas. Their bleats of disapproval culminate in what can only be described as an archaeological disaster. Grapes are flung, wine is spilled, and a cacophony of confusion ensues as everyone tries to decipher whether they are victims of divine retribution or simply an unfortunate case of bad timing. Finally, after hours of grappling with philosophical inquiries and an uninvited woolly audience, an old woman approaches, tapping her cane as if it were a magic wand. She snags a handful of grapes, throws them back as if she's trying to prove a point about food safety, and announces, "Turnips are the real curse, you fools." With that, the tension evaporates faster than the wine, and suddenly, the crowd erupts with laughter, cheers, and about 4 too many toasts to the poor judgment of their grape-related fears. And as the festival carries on, they all learn a valuable lesson about taking their grapes and life choices with a grain of salt. So take heed, dear viewers. If life hands you grapes, just remember to check for dramatic omens before you indulge. And if you're going to fear anything in ancient Greece, let it not be the grapes. Instead, fear the potential calamities of talking to them too much. Picture this. It's 450 BC, and we find ourselves in the heart of Athens, where philosophers debate the meaning of life, and the average citizen debates which local tavern truly serves the best fermented grape juice. The air is thick with the heady aroma of barley, olive oil, and a distinct whiff of desperation as the latest tragedy unfolds in the amphitheater down the street. As the sun dips below the Acropolis, casting a long shadow on the city, we enter a bustling symposium. Not a boring old book club, mind you, but the kind of gathering that could make even Bacchus blush. The drinking party is in full swing, complete with reclined couches, mouth-watering arrays of meats, and of course the pièce de résistance. A staggering variety of wines, each more pretentious than the last. Meet our key characters. Alcibiades, the dapper yet notoriously reckless nobleman whose reputation for drunken shenanigans is rivaled only by his knack for making political enemies faster than one could say Greek salad. Then there's Socrates, who, well, is ever so slightly intoxicated and ready to interrogate everyone's life choices, particularly their choice of wine. As for the food, grapes, olives, fish, and whatever the local market had that day, though heaven forbid they coast on leftovers. Now, this isn't just a wine-tasting event. It's a gladiator match of goblets and grapes. To the untrained eye, it may look like a casual gathering of friends sharing a drink, but peel back the layers of charm, and you'll find a more monstrous underbelly of rivalries, lofty philosophies, and some good old-fashioned drinking games, which often devolved into philosophical debates about whether or not you could drink your feelings. Tension ignites as the swift-footed, sandal-wearing servants rush from one side of the marble-floored venue to the other, carrying amphorae of liquid power. Each amphora is adorned not just with beautiful paintings, but also with handwritten warnings, such as "Drink me if you dare" or "May contain hemlock." You see, these ancient Greeks were deeply superstitious, convinced their gods were secretly judging them based on how they handled their libations. With every sip, you could either invoke the blessings of Dionysus or earn the ire of the very gods if your palate failed to impress. In a fit of both enlightenment and intoxication, Alcibiades volunteers to play a new game, Conquer the Cup. The premise is simple. Each participant must chug from a particular amphora and then recite a fragment of a famous poem. Spoiler alert, none of the participants win, but they all end up overly poetic and significantly less sober. As the merriment reaches a fever pitch, a cataclysmic event strikes. Alcibiades tips over a particularly dangerous amphora, sending its contents, an exquisite blend from some mythical vineyard, spilling across the floor, creating chaos in a tapestry of drunken laughter and dismay. Scribes scramble to document the incident. Artists gather to immortalize the moment for future generations. Who knew spilling wine could be considered an act worthy of pen and tablet? And then it hits. An unholy silence falls over the symposium. The wine has absorbed the chaos of the room, and now it's an existential question in a chalice. Socrates, with characteristic sardonic wisdom, declares, "This is not mere wine. It's a reflection of our follies, our debates, and our failures." And perhaps, just perhaps, a little snack of olives will help. Thus, the evening devolves into laughter and sweaty camaraderie as they sip their new favorite blend, the unmistakable confusion of grapes. Note, of course, that what began as a judgment of taste ended up being a profound lesson on the joys of Dionysian revelry. The final takeaway: just remember, drinking wine in ancient Greece was a lot like navigating social media today. You either come out enlightened or regretfully remembered for spilling your drink on a questionable romantic interest. So next time you're at a wine tasting, check your amphora or your inhibitions, because who needs enemies when you have a glass full of awkward exposure? Welcome to ancient Greece, where the year is 430 BC and you're about to discover the real meaning of dinner parties gone wrong. Picture this: a lavish symposium reeking of overripe figs and questionable seafood, filled with philosophers mouthing off about the virtues of democracy while thoroughly ignoring their rapidly declining hygiene. The setting is an opulent atrium, dimmed by hanging oil lamps that flicker like the fiery expectations of the night's entertainment. The air is thick with the pungent aroma of olive oil, fish sauce, and the lingering essence of bad decisions made just a few too many amphorae ago. It's an intoxicating mix, not dissimilar to your last college party, but, at least in your case, no one expected the food to kill them. In the opulent center of the room sits an enormous pot of lentil stew, regarded with the reverence usually reserved for relics of the gods. But let's be clear. In this time, lentils are not merely sustenance. They're basically edible dice of fate. The host, Aristophanes the inevitably overly dramatic, has succumbed to the absurdity of ancient traditions which dictate that the serving of this dish will determine the wisdom of the evening. No pressure at all. As the evening drags on, tension simmers. Enter the esteemed guests: Socrates, with his famously questioning brow, and a gaggle of philosopher groupies, half of whom are merely trying to impress him with their alleged insights into lentil existentialism. The footmen tread cautiously, offering an array of so-called delicacies, and by delicacies we mean that weird fermented fish everyone steers clear of, a classic ancient Greek party foul. Now, enter the superstition. It's said that the first to taste the lentils will either be blessed with wisdom or doomed to a lifetime of regrettable anecdotes. The moment comes. The entire room collectively holds its breath as a philosopher, convinced he's the reincarnation of Athena, ventures forth. It's almost as if he believes bravery and food poisoning are somehow interchangeable. He takes a ladle full of the lentil stew and, with the cautiousness of someone attempting a high dive for the first time, he gulps it down. A collective gasp erupts. Was it a sincere attempt at enlightenment, or precisely what you should avoid if you plan on living to see your next symposium? Seconds tick by like weeks. Everyone observes him, waiting for a sign from the universe, or a sign from his stomach. The moment he clutches his abdomen, the ambiance flips from philosophical reverie to chaotic frenzy. A brawl breaks. Not the kind that involves swords, but rather a valiant tussle over water jugs and wine barrels. There's something poetically tragic about philosophers negotiating like toddlers over juice boxes in a playroom gone wild. And then, amidst the brawling and shouting, a revelation from above. The lentils weren't fated to cause regret, but were merely over-seasoned with way too much salt. Peace is restored as noblemen eagerly start polishing off the remaining stew, emboldened by the thrill of living dangerously. Here's a fun fact. The Greeks believed in food as a means to invoke the favor of the gods. So, prepare yourself for a future predicated on tasteless beans enjoyed under the oversight of deities who, honestly, had better things to do with their time than monitor a meal. So, what's the moral of this story? Whether it's food poisoning or philosophical debates gone awry, the true peril of ancient Greece was never the warriors on the battlefield, but rather the surprise ingredient in your stew. Always taste test before philosophical chat. Welcome to the glorious chaos that is ancient Greece, where philosophers pondered the meaning of life while the rest of the population debated the merits of the extra-virgin label. Our telling starts in the bustling Agora of Athens, circa 400 BC, where the sun blazed down like the skeptical gaze of a distant god, illuminating stalls overflowing with wrinkled fruit, questionable seafood, and your not-so-humble olive oil. Now, olive oil wasn't merely a salad dressing in those days. It was the sacred elixir of life, a multi-purpose magic potion that could just as easily add flavor to your meal as it could be used to anoint athletes pre-game. Picture the scene. Merchants shouting, philosophers accidentally tripping over pretentious ideas, and behind it all an aroma of ripe olives, mingling with the sweat of manual laborers and lively debates on whether Socrates was actually a fan of meatloaf. The tension thickens as we zoom in on Cleon, a wily vendor whose olive oil production methods were, shall we say, a bit suspect. He claimed his oil was so pure it could double as perfume or, on a very lucky day, an effective lubricant. The truth? His olives had spent more time flirting with the ground than hanging on the tree. But alas, Cleon could sell ice to the polar bear, and today was his big day. Enter the olive oil contest, an event so overhyped it made the Olympics look like child's play. The prize? Untold glory, a column in the nearest sycophantic pamphlet, and perhaps an honorary statue in the center of town that would sure to feature an impressively chiseled chin. As pressure turned up like a pot of boiling water, Cleon decided it was time to fortify his reputation with a little creative oil-making. Picture this. Cleon invites a few locals, all clad in togas that have probably seen better days, to his special blending room, a title that really meant back room where I hide the cheap oil. There they gather to taste test the fruits of his labor, which, in reality, consisted of swindling neighbors' oil while spiking it with essences of lavender and promises of eternal youth. Naturally, the first couple of concerned citizens who tried this concoction turned from skeptical to bewildered, and not just because they discovered their oil was thicker than the traditional mix. Mid-sampling, rumors spiraled like a windstorm. What if Cleon's oil was actually just infused with the tears of cheated customers? Are we ingesting the philosophical equivalent of lead paint? Pessimism ran rampant, and the tasting turned into a cross between a tragic Greek play and a farcical comedy as local idiocy clashed with overblown pride. And what's a scandal without a twist? Just as Cleon anticipated his rise to fame, the village wise woman, the town recoiler from anything that smells less than godly, decided to crash the party. Armed with her extensive knowledge of herbs and a wild education from life experience itself, she burst through the crowd, asserting that the prank was akin to spitting in a god's face. A tasting ensued which would have made anyone question every relationship ever as she unceremoniously declared, "This olive oil is as authentic as a philosopher's pledge of modesty." With a flick of her wrist, she revealed the secret ingredient, a fermented blend of "were those potatoes." The crowd gasped. Cleon, red-faced and likely regretting his career choices, scrambled like a child caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Soon, the farce spiraled into complete anarchy, with people throwing dregs of cleansing oil at each other while chanting, "May the gods forgive me." Thus, a day filled with sunshine and olives turned into a disaster of hurling half-blended sauces as Athenian citizens banded together to shun Cleon and his dubious creations. The moral of the story: if you ever find yourself in ancient Greece, don't just trust any olive oil. Remember, your salad dressing could be the emotional fallout of a vendor's midlife crisis, or at least spiked with a little too much lavender. As we wrap up our 120-minute odyssey through ancient Greece, where the philosophers engaged in deep thoughts while the common folk scrambled to fend off starvation and marauding bands of invading troops, I believe we can take a moment to reflect on one of humanity's most persistent delusions: our obsession with asserting control over animals. Yes, we've spent centuries trying to dominate the natural world, coaxing beasts into servitude with the irresistible allure of a squirrel's crushable acorn, whilst they look at us like we're the fluffy harbingers of their long-awaited revenge. The annals of history are littered with tales of animal vengeance, from the infamous Battle of the Crows, where the feathered fiends turned against humanity because we dared to try to catch them with a net, only to become future epic writers' muses, to the great tale of the rats in the Black Death, who didn't particularly appreciate being blamed for the unfortunate spread of the plague. Ah, the irony. We blamed the rats, but have you ever considered it was a cunning pact of retribution from them all along? Their way of saying, "Thanks for the cheese, but we're busy plotting your downfall." And as we venture into the modern world, we see the trend of animal counter-revolutions evolving from the strangles of oppression into something more subtly subversive. Just ask anyone who's ever faced the ire of a disgruntled cat after daring to leave the house without providing sufficient scratching post services. In reality, it's quite possible that every wagging tail isn't an indicator of joy or just good puppy vibes. No, my friends, maybe the dog isn't wagging his tail. He's winding up for something far more ominous, like a strategic surprise attack on your favorite pair of shoes. You think you've trained him well, that you've got it all figured out. But oh, the age-old wisdom of history reveals otherwise. Take Boudica, a fierce warrior queen. Really, she was the original high-stakes organizer of the animal kingdom. It makes one wonder how much more cats could have accomplished had they the ambition of Boudica. Surely the dog's social networks would be shaking in their collars if only the feline overlords broke free from their denim-clad human couches, rising to reclaim their throne atop the world's trinkets. So, as you stride back into your comfortable modern life, filled with power consolidation over your herbivorous house pets, pause for a moment. Remember, no matter how advanced our societies become, we remain but players on a stage fraught with the possibilities of four-legged fallout. So the next time you decide to bend the will of a creature much smaller than yourself, just know that their silence doesn't mean compliance. It might just be brewing a storm of their own. Just be sure to keep your shoes out of reach. Until next time, in the immortal words of ancient Greece, perhaps it's time you reconsider your hierarchies and keep your pets happily fed, lest they plot a revolution of their own. Thus, we leave you with the indelible truth that in the struggle for supremacy, you may think you've got it all under wraps, but one day it's the animals that shall have the last laugh.